Welcome everybody to a different video of Huffle and stuff. Today's episode we're gonna actually be looking at something a little bit differently. I'm using this game as kind of footage to play in the background really. It's a fun game, I've been playing it a little bit, not too much. But today's topic, I don't know if you know this about me, I'm a little bit of a writer. So what I want to do today is I want to talk a little bit of writing. And I want to talk about specifically romance. Now, in my own circle of friends and colleagues, I've talked about how passionate I am for writing and what kind of technical skill goes into writing. And I thought about why not doing maybe a series of these with romance being the first one, just to kind of get it out of the way. I do have a couple other notes out there for different ideas about what I want to write about. Some not just about genres, but about character pieces and how to write certain types of characters. So I want to do more of these. And I'm just going to be playing Lovers and A Dangerous Space-Time in the background, just because it was the most romantic thing I had available to me at the time. And it's fun. So without further ado, I kind of want to talk about how to write romance. Or at least, in my mind, how one should go about writing romance. And I've have my little notes here. You can hear them crinkling in my hands. I wrote these at work. And I have them split into 3 different parts. Basically. Yeah, alright. And I'm gonna start the game, and I'm gonna have a little bit of a rough time going back between the game and reading. So just bear with me here while I do that. And yeah, I've made no progress with this game. So just kind of bear with me while I do this. Because this is going to be my first video doing this. And hopefully the success of this one determines how I do the rest of them realistically. I have unlocked nothing. This guy. Alright. So when we talk about romance, the place I want to start with is, why do we write romantic genre of fiction? Why do we do these things regarding character motivations and desires? Why do we go about writing romance? What's the draw of it from a writing point of view, from the author's perspective? Why do they want to write romance? And for cats, really? No. So the reason we write romance, in my eyes, is mostly a form of vicarious wish fulfillment, as well as cathartic experiential stimulus or stimulation. We try to foster truth while inundated by an artificiality, which is finding meaning in chaos. And a lot of time that's what fiction is all about. Fiction is a lot about writing a fake scenario, exploring characters, and really, by doing that, try to explore what truth you might find in it. And finding meaning in chaos is a lot of the time why romance exists. We try to find stability or foundation or dependable other to kind of grasp onto in this crazy world of ours. And at the end of the day, it's kind of wish fulfillment. You know, we hope that through all our trials and errors, there's someone out there for all of us, really, who fulfills our crazy kinks and interests and loves. But on another level, it's also just for sex and reproduction and the furthering of one's legacy through another, spiritually, genetically, emotionally. Man, my notes are crazy. This is all a very just advanced. This is all just a really big way of saying, what? Of what? Just basically what I've heard as called self-actualization. The idea that we will become fuller people or better people through relationships. The general betterment of humanity, you know. So the idea what I'm going for here is why we write romantic fiction. Or why people want to explore the idea of romanticism in literature is the idea that we're exploring the relationships in an imaginary setting because they quite don't have that tangibility in real life, or if they do, they're frustrated by our own real life problems. And engaging them in an artificial form or in a fictional form allows us to kind of express ourselves, explore ourselves in a safe place. We get to find meaning and stability in what's usually a very chaotic endeavor. And in short form format, for a novel or a short story, it's really an opportunity to see that and kind of get it in small bursts rather than have to kind of go back into the real world and see somebody and wonder if you're doing the right thing. It's easier to objectively analyze somebody else's romantic problems than it is to tackle your own, you know? And that's true for just a lot of problems in general. Alright, now let's see if I can actually talk and play. So, at the end of the day, everyone's going to have different reasons for why they write romance. You know, why they do it realistically. Whether it being saving bunnies from dungeons or collecting these weird floating things. There's going to be different reasons why we love. And why we want to explore loving. And where am I? How do I drive the ship again? It's the steering wheel. And how do I control hold X? Nope. How do I... Aha! It's Y and then... Okay. And it's why do we... So, basically it comes down to... This is a terrible game, by the way, to pick. Because I have to multitask like crazy. So I'm gonna let this cat do most of the work for me, realistically. And... So there's a lot of reasons why we write romance, and ultimately they come down to... Oh, no. Smash them! And ultimately it comes down to what kind of relationship are you trying to explore? What kind of balance are you looking to strike in your life? What kind of meaning are you trying to find? And what's the best way you see of doing that, and which characters do you want to use in order to pursue that? So now that we've talked a little bit about the why and the deeper human motivation of exploring romance, I want to talk about how. And while I get shot at by these people, let me explore that idea. And let me just look at my notes while I sit here getting shot at. So we go back to the question of what kind of story we're trying to tell, like any kind of story. And we come to the reasoning of... We come back to the reasoning of romance is the interaction of two or more characters and their motivations and desires to accomplish something. It should be the ultimate celebration of dynamic and explorative writing. You should be taking two characters, putting them in the room, and really seeing what you can do with them and what kind of motivations and desires they have, what drama you create between them. I'm in the wrong one. And so, going forward, really, there are a lot of traps and tropes of the genre. Romance as a genre, to me, in some ways, has become kind of a commercial product sold to deliver wish fulfillment. And, yeah, I made a little note to myself that says I'm a cynical jerk sometimes. But I can be sometimes true, unfortunately. I'm gonna have the cat shoot that thing. But that's dependent on the characters, really. How you write it is dependent on the characters. Maybe your characters are the type of characters that go through cliches, and that's totally fine. And so long as they're kind of aware of that, there is a room for meta-narratives within romance of how people are aware. It's kind of like that line in Man of Steel where Lois says, it's all downhill after the first kiss, even though I'm not sure who says that realistically. But really, you should also be attempting to showcase not just characters getting together or getting to the point of relationship where they finally start interacting with each other or have that intimacy, but maintaining that intimacy. Good romance understands that it doesn't always work out, and writers, not necessarily the audience, have a responsibility to recognize an unhealthy relationship and imply the understanding through text, whether or not it is actually resolved. And that's basically my way of saying a romance doesn't have to work out. You know, it doesn't have to succeed when you write it. You know, it doesn't have to be a happy ending. In fact, sometimes it's more powerful when things just, you know, end up being the way they are. And there's nothing you can do about that. There's nothing a lot of us. Again, the closer you can portray the truth in fiction is the more you're going to do yourself justice at the end of the day. And the better justice you'll be doing the audience, who will take your experience as a learning experience and see something to be gained from it. Okay. I do have some general guidelines here. That's some things a lot of people get trapped in by the genre of writing. Just not to stay away from, but just kind of guidelines more like than anything else, to be perfectly honest. And let me see here. Okay. Number 1, characters should not be together before they are individuals. That's basically just my way of saying no one wants to see you mash 2 character cartoons or just action figures and say fight, 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 kiss, kiss, kiss. give them some personality. You know, it's much easier to learn one person is an alcoholic, or one person has abandonment issues, or has a terrible job, and then have them go up against somebody who's a total free spirit. Now, you can shorthand a lot of that with visuals and, you know, just easy symbolism to say what a character is like or doesn't like. But the more in depth you go, the more promising it is when two characters finally come together and have their dynamics interact. And it should be dramatic. It should be something insanely interesting to watch. You know, we should be going ooh and ah every time someone says a piece of dialogue, because we're matching them up in a relationship. We're trying to see if they're compatible in a way. Okay? Unless I do have an exception to some of these. They shouldn't be together before they're individuals, unless it's an adolescent tragedy. Because then, at that point, you're not really an individual. You're still just a kid growing up, learning what it is to be in love, learning what it is to be yourself realistically. So it's really difficult to kind of be together when it's gonna just fail. And Romeo and Juliet is a good example of that, where it's a tragedy. It's another thing that it's a romance that doesn't have to be resolved, because you're supposed to learn something from it. You're supposed to learn that dumb kids should, you know, not kill themselves to be in love. They're just 14. And I know for the era of the time, it was more likely to get married at that point. And Romeo and Juliet is more a story about societal constructs than the failure of their romance. But the point, I feel, is somewhat still strong, that they're not really people. They're just a girl and a guy that happen to be in love with each other. Their family marks them more than anything else. And still, family can still be a good indication of where the relationship is at. Now, another guideline. Don't deliver intimacy and understanding before characters really know each other. This goes similar to the first problem I said in the first guideline. Is you shouldn't deliver intimacy unless they really know each other. In real life, people don't just get together without really trying to... well, I'll say a certain percentage of people don't really just get together at the drop of a hat. They tend to try and have more barriers between their relationship and between levels of intimacy. It's really just how it works. Although I do have an exception for that as well. Again, this is why these are guidelines. It's just these are guidelines because I don't want you to do them or fall into these similar traps without thinking about it or without having a good reason, realistically. And the exception to this one is unless one character has specific foresight of the relationship. And that means unless one character is manipulating the relationship or that character knows about the person beforehand. And that way has, like, you know, they've heard about them through a friend, they've been told that it's their destiny to meet somebody like this, then that sets up an interesting dynamic where some person already understands that there's going to be a relationship, or they want a relationship, or like kind of like somebody who wants the unobtainable person in their life. Then it gives you a chance to break down expectations, and that's interesting. What a person's expectations are versus reality. That's another important part of romance. But I will say that total foresight is impossible. A person cannot know the complete future and be the main character. It just ruins the thrill of it, unless that's the whole point of your novel, in which case that's kind of a different story altogether. It's less of a romance and more about what goes in hand with immortality or omniscience in general. Okay, The Notebook doesn't count because it's a frame narrative. The guy knows how it's going to end, but he's telling you the story step by step, and the ending is just a twist on, you know, their love finally coming together, but they don't get to fully enjoy it to the max capacity because of Alzheimer's. Okay. Third guideline. The setting should not dominate the relationship. Rather, the relationship should react to the setting. This is to say that if you have a set piece in a Western, the Western shouldn't matter more than the relationship. What should matter is how the relationship reacts to being in a Western, or in a medieval, or in a sci-fi. It should matter how these characters are reacting to the boundaries in their lives, similar to Romeo and Juliet. It doesn't matter that they're in the era in time that they are. West Side Story shows us that it doesn't matter. There's always going to be it's about the societal constructs and how people react to it and what lengths people go to stay together, to beat apart, to involve each other in their lives. This next one might take a little bit of explaining, but it's the last one I have in terms of guidelines. If not horizontal development, the relationship should get vertical development. That's a writing term that just means horizontal development basically means progression. In a movie, someone will get horizontal development usually because, you know, they They experience something, they get over it, they learn, they try to become better people. The movie's over. You know, they've changed in some way. Vertical development is more like a sitcom where it gets reset every episode. You know, in The Simpsons, Homer's always going to be a bumbling, fumbling idiot, and that's always going to reset every episode. But that doesn't mean we can't put him through the full gambit of different situations and scenarios, so that we see him do interesting things and he reacts to them in interesting ways. So, if your romance or your story doesn't necessarily have characters that change or progress or feel like they are any different than they were before, at the very least they should be put through the ringer. They should be put through scenario after scenario. You should see them in relationship. You should see them in relationship with different people, in different settings, in places where, you know, they're not comfortable, in, you know, different locations that bring out different parts of them. That's really important. That way, like any relationship, you know, it's fine if you're in the honeymoon phase and you guys have never been outside your one favorite local pub, but it's you know, it's not interesting. You know, go to more places, trigger the characters to feel more things, if you will. And that brings me ultimately to my last point about romance, and that's to frustrate or to satisfy the audience. A standard relationship should experience both to some degree. You should feel both satisfaction and frustration. Because again, this is someone you're supposed to be depending on, you're supposed to be loving, you're supposed to be feeling great intimacy towards, but a lot of the expectation can set you up for failure. It can make you feel like, at the end of the day, you know, you could be expecting more than what's actually realistic. You want your audience to feel like your characters are real and have definite opinions on them, or expectations on their circumstances. How it ends should feel less like a decision and more like a realization of the established path that the characters are on. Much of this applies to general writing as well. What I'm saying is, and I realize this is kind of patronizing, make it realistic, make it organic. Don't decide that characters shouldn't be together. Decide what the characters should decide they should do, you know? It doesn't really matter ultimately whether or not they're frustrated or satisfied. Usually they should be acting according to how you've written them, to how they act as people. And ultimately how you choose to frustrate or satisfy the audience depends on what your motivation is for writing this. Do you want to write about how your own love life hasn't been working out and you want to warn people of theirs? Go ahead. If you want to show that it can work out, then satisfy the audience with a good story like that. But it's ultimately what you want to do, and a lot of this comes down to your, again, how you want to interpret your own story. But I'm just warning you to stay away against some of the failings and, you know, saying what things you should just keep in mind. Final thoughts, just off the top of my head. Well, that I've also written down from the top of my head. Love and romance can be a difficult subject to explore, fictionally or otherwise. It requires a certain amount of patience and restraint. That restraint can be emotional, sexual, even bondage related. You have to be willing to speak from a vulnerable place that isn't just your own, but extends to the failings or flaws of human intimacy at large. Your characters don't have to be perfect, and they shouldn't be. But what's important is that someone else finds a connection through them. There's someone out there for everyone. And sometimes there isn't. Ultimately, what I'm trying to say is, romance can be hard. And sometimes it's hard to make someone else believe how you feel is authentic. And sometimes it's hard for your characters to feel like other people believe they're authentic. As long as you relate that difficulty, that frustration, that satisfaction from being intimate, from trying to fall in love with somebody, to trying to feel this emotion, this crazy adventure, trying to navigate through the approval, disapproval of your family and friends, as long as you try to accurately portray that in whatever setting you're in, you ultimately can't go wrong. Because you're giving a full picture of what's happening, and you're trying to make it feel organic, and you're keeping in mind all the things that go into relationships realistically. And you're keeping in mind all the things that people go through, humans go through. And sometimes it doesn't work out. I wish I could answer questions personally. Like I wish I could kind of like, I feel like it's not a real like writing session unless someone asks me questions and I can bounce off them. If you guys have any questions about how I feel romance should be written, or have examples in the comments about how romance should be written, or what are bad examples or good examples, you guys can hit me up in the comments. Actually, hit me or Mercedes up in the comments on Facebook or on YouTube. because this is something we talk about a lot in terms of accurate portrayals of romance and what it's like to be either a fumbling teen or an adult with really bad expectations of what a relationship is, realistically. Ow. Or what it's like to have cats and love cats that do half the work for you. Look at him do the work for me. No, 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 no. Wait, do the cat button. What does that do? Oh, that's a map. Anyways, those are my thoughts on writing romance. Ultimately, I hope it was somewhat informative. I hope I wasn't too all over the place or scatterbrained while playing this game. I apologize if some of my thoughts did seem scattered because I was kind of all over the place. And leave some feedback if you thought this was helpful at all, if you found some of this interesting, or some of my perspectives interesting about writing romance. And stick around next time, because I'm hoping to do more topics. I do have another topic in mind for what I want to write about, what I want to talk about writing about. And again, these are ultimately just shorthand guides to what I feel is the best approach to starting, without having like at least an hour of your time and someone else to bounce off of. There's no way I could go through list, detail by detail about what's the perfect way to write a romance or how I would write a romance. This is just me kind of like, giving some general guidelines and, just some thoughts. Sharing some thoughts, really, about how I feel is maybe the best way to approach some of these ideas. And again, I hope this is opening up some conversation topic somewhere, anywhere out there. All right. So I hope you enjoyed this edition of Huffle Stuff video, this edition of How to Write, and I hope you ultimately get something out of it. And yeah, this didn't come out on Valentine's Day, so deal with that. Love you.